self-awareness. How is it currently in Indonesia? So we're here to discuss a little bit about like the differences between Indonesia and New Zealand when it comes to like mental health and their awareness, right? Now, in Indonesia, in recent years, there's been like more discussion. There's been more discussion about what is it like bad habits or like generational trauma. However, at the same time, of course, there are still like some people who denies it, especially like from certain age demographics, like the older ones who still believe, as an example, like men has to be strong or men has to be not as open as women. Meanwhile, like women are like has this more freedom with it. Aside from like these differences in age demographics, there are differences in like places where people are, some are more like progressive with it and some aren't. Now, how is it like in New Zealand maybe?
I'd say we have a lot of the similar breakdowns of demographics in that older people haven't necessarily been exposed to the same amount of like mental health advocacy, and so they still feel like they have to repress their struggles and their emotions. And also, I think they feel some responsibility because they're the head of household to not burden their children or the people that rely on them, and so they don't necessarily feel like they have someone to open up to.
I also feel like the terminology is changing. A lot of the older generation don't know how to describe mental health in the same way that we experience it. So like, I've talked to older people before where depression is seen as like bouts of sadness and anxiety is seen as like someone's just fearful or stressed. Yeah, so it's like the way that we describe it and like the chronic nature of it has like changed.
I think it's also like they see it as more like a problem for someone else. Like they have social awareness of, oh yeah, anxiety and depression are really prevalent, they're very important, like people need help, but not me. Like they don't necessarily recognize it in themselves because it's always been this way, or this is just how it
part of like your nature. And like if you grow up and you're experiencing these mental health struggles and you don't have a way to define it, then it just becomes a part of your character, it becomes embedded, and then you can't really recognize it in yourself.
Especially if you grew up in that environment and you see like your families act that way in a similar way, and you feel like, oh, that's the norm, that's how it is, like this is how what my family is, right?
I also feel like because mental health, there is a biological genetic component to mental health. So I think that a lot of people will have like anxious or depressed children and they don't know like how to see that in themselves, even though they carry like the same characteristics and traits.
Yeah, I think with a lot of older people, when younger people express like, oh, I experienced this symptom of, mental illness or something like that, they'll say something along the lines of like, oh, everyone feels that. Like that's just, everyone goes through that, like you're being dramatic. But it's like, not everyone actually feels it. They just,
because they have experienced it, they feel like, oh, that's okay, I've had that before too, and I came out fine. It's like that. Exactly. That's interesting.
We have a really big problem in New Zealand of high suicide rates for men more than women, because of that repression and because of like, social stigma where they feel like it threatens their masculinity to admit weakness or vulnerability. And so even though they might have social awareness, they still feel like they personally can't reach out
to people.
I don't know how you guys interact with your friends, but it's like, it's less normalized to talk to your guy friends about like the way that you're feeling, whereas like in female circles it's like a lot more normalized to be like expressing how you're feeling, like what's getting you down, where you are in life.
But it sounds like similar to in Indonesia, I think, because like I have some like male friends where I could easily tell them, oh, it's fine, like talk to me about your feelings, you can cry or something like that, but like they say like, no, it's not that easy, right? It's like in a way, but like keeping it to themselves, they're also like repressing it, right?
Absolutely.
Repression, it like prevents them from like acknowledging the problems and actually like working on it to improve themselves and like reaching their potential. Like repression for each person is different, right? Can't be the same for everyone. So maybe if we like try to talk about it, each person will like have different experience about it. So we can try to see it from like its physical manifestation, right? How does it look like acted out from that person? Because obviously, from what we've studied in psychology, while we can't exactly like look into the mind, we can't read people's mind, right? But we can see how they act. It represents what is going on in their head. What could be like some self-destructive behavior, like the ones that aren't like addressing the problem?
Yeah, so like that's the self-sabotage kind of coming in. Yeah, so New Zealand has a pretty big alcohol abuse problem. There's a lot of like drink driving campaigns and like trying to stop people from binge drinking campaigns, but I would say that that's probably like the biggest way that people repress their feelings.
Yeah, I think it's also in some ways a way that people feel okay expressing their feelings. Like the only time like one of your male friends might feel comfortable explaining how he feels is when he's drunk, and he can blame it on the alcohol.
Yeah, I even had this experience with female friends recently where I had a friend who, she had a pretty big trauma in her life, and we were like hanging out and playing board games and drinking wine, and she in that moment felt comfortable telling us because she had had alcohol in her system. Like otherwise she wouldn't feel comfortable telling us about her traumas. So it's almost like a way to just turn around the next day and be like, oh, what did I say? I was so drunk.
Yeah, but then it's also not like a good adaptive behavior, because then needing alcohol every time you want to express vulnerability leads obviously to alcoholism. It's bad for your body, even if it feels good to get things off your chest. So I think that's something that in New Zealand we have to work on, getting people to feel okay with being vulnerable without having an excuse.
Alcohol lowers inhibition, right? That's why like people probably like talk easier about their feelings when they're drunk. Indonesia doesn't exactly have this like drinking culture. Some people do drink, but maybe it's not as exposed to the public. But instead, like in recent years, from what I've seen, like some of my friends have seen, there's this increasing culture of like smoking and like vaping and like using nicotine to pretty much like get their mind off of their problems, right? It is more common to see people vape lately because of course like cigarettes are more expensive, right? And also people see cigarettes has this like more negative effects rather than vapes. Getting addicted to nicotine isn't exactly like the best way to like because like once you try to like get away from it, you're going to experience withdrawals. Like you feel like this need, like, oh, I need it again, right? When it comes to like addiction, you can't get off of it like that easily. Like I have had some friends who like they have to take a smoke break like every few minutes of like studying, so they don't get overwhelmed with their stress, with their pressure. How is it like that in New Zealand?
Yeah, so we have like a government-wide, like country-wide initiative to be a smoke-free country by 2025. So that means that the pressure to stop smoking cigarettes is like quite high, and it's like a little bit shunned almost to like still be smoking, but a lot of people vape, and I think that has increased. Like initially vaping was meant to be like the help people get off smoking cigarettes, and then it's just taken huge surge, especially like amongst, I mean it's like through all generations, but like amongst uni students, it's kind of so many people vape. It's a similar thing,
especially because they're not coming off of an addiction to cigarettes, they are just gaining addiction
to another thing, right?
Exactly.
Nicotine is like so much higher because you can get like 100, 200 nicotine level, which is like, I don't know what a cigarette is. I think it's like closer to 50. So you're doubling the amount of nicotine that you're getting in your body, which is just
isn't exactly healthy.
No.
I feel like because obviously cigarettes are really expensive, even more expensive in New Zealand because of tax, but also vaping is expensive. Like if you have to buy a new vape every week, every few days, that's a drain, especially if you're a uni student and you don't have a big income. It's not really great long term that you have this addiction that is costing you so much, not just your body but your finances, and potentially like some people have like guilt or shame about doing it, so it's just so much more stress.
I see.
It's also like I mean, cigarettes have an environmental cost, but they break down, whereas like vape, you're getting like plastic pods, and that's like, you know, a lot worse for the planet.
Yeah.
So it's like,
It's just like a lot of problems in
Yeah.
just like one
Exactly,
action. I
yeah.
see. Yeah, very like physical or like visible self-destructive behaviors that people usually like act out even in public, right? So like we see, oh, that person might not be coping as well, but like what exactly is the difference between self-sabotage or like self-destructive behaviors and coping mechanism for the two of you?
Sustainability is a big one. If you use meditation as a coping mechanism, that's something that you can do forever, always,
I see.
because all you need is yourself. If you're smoking as a coping mechanism, that's not sustainable for your body, it's not sustainable for the finances, for the earth. And so I think that is an unhealthy coping mechanism. It's also literally unhealthy for your
I
body.
see.
I have a friend who, when she gets stressed at exams, she watches Love Island.
I see.
And that's like, you know, a coping mechanism. It's a little bit of escapism, like in small
Nice.
doses. It's like, you know, not something that's consuming her or something that she needs, but it's something that can help lessen the feeling of pressure or anxiety in the moment. Finding healthy coping mechanisms is just about
what feels right.
what feels right, but isn't hurting you or other people.
Yeah, and I mean, like, ultimately, if you're suffering from severe mental illness, coping mechanisms are therapy and like speaking to somebody who can make radical change in your life. But for some people, that's not achievable. So there has to be simple things that you can do in your life that make.
Absolutely. Also, I think having other people kind of checking you is really valuable. Like you were saying before, it's easier to see things from an outsider's perspective. So if you have a friend who you can confide in, and they are able to be honest with you and say, hey, what you're doing is not healthy, I think that's really valuable, because you can't always see in yourself if what you're doing is harmful to you, especially because of the way your, you know, mentality works, is that if something feels good in the moment, your brain will, it releases chemicals that makes you want to do it again. And so someone else is not getting that release, and so they can tell you honestly whether that's just something you're doing like a band-aid, or if it's like addressing the bigger problem.
Well, and talking about like community and having those friends, like I have a friend who struggles like with anxiety and she sees a psychologist, but she also has a group of like friends who she trusts with like her anxiety and her feelings around that. And so when she is like feeling overwhelmed, she has people that she can call up and be like, can we go for a walk? Can we go for a coffee? Can I have external people help me through this tough time? Which I feel like it's because of the way society is set up, it's quite individualist, and like there's a lot of focus on fixing your problems yourself, especially in New Zealand. Like there's this Kiwi like do it yourself attitude, and so it's like I want to be able to get through this myself and deal with it myself. But knowing that a part of it should be having a community and having people that can help you through, like that's so valuable.
Yeah, because humans are social animals. We were never meant to deal with everything alone. We have always evolved to work together, and so mental health shouldn't be any different.
All right, and thank you very much, Bri and Rebecca. That's very interesting to like learn on maybe like the similarities and the differences between New Zealand and Indonesia when it comes to like mental health awareness and issues. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dah.